Okay. Okay. Thank you all for coming. So we're going to start with call to order. It is 7:01 and roll call. Megan Sparks.
Bethany Sorrentino.
Amy Crawford.
Josh Port.
And Joe Murphy, representative to the planning board.
Okay, and I'd also like to note that we have Charlie Thomas Davidson and Colin Penny here as well. So we wanted to welcome everyone. This is the Affordable Housing Collaborative meeting, and we decided as a group, originally we had had a meeting with Charlie and Colin, and it was very informative. We all had learned quite a bit from it, and moving forward, we decided that we wanted to open it up to the other town planning board and boards in town so that they could get a firm understanding of affordable housing. So I am Megan Sparks, I am the chair, and here we have,
And I'm Josh Port, vice chair. Sorry. Josh Port, vice chair, for those who couldn't hear.
Amy Crawford. I'm a committee member.
Bethany Sorrentino. I'm also a committee member.
Again, Joe Murphy, representative to the planning board.
We also have a secretary, Leslie Kennedy, who's not present tonight.
I have to say my hearing is not great, especially in this room. So please, if I say what several times, just yell for me. So the way that we are going to run this meeting is we're going to have a discussion up here. We have several slides that we want to go through to give everyone a background on affordable housing, and then we're going to open it up for discussion and questions with the audience, and we really would love to hear what you have to say. Any questions or feedback that you can provide, I think would be helpful. So this evening, we're going to provide a primer on affordable housing, and we can build a shared framework of information and data about our town. We're going to hear from our local experts from Habitat for Humanity and Women's Development Corp., and hopefully they can give us a firm understanding of where we are and where we can move towards. So, our mission. Brian, can you move forward? Okay. Okay, so here we have our mission for the affordable housing, but basically we want to be a local resource, an advisory source to the town related to affordable housing issues, and if you want, you can read our mission right there. Tonight, we're going to start with what is affordable housing, and then we want to give you an overview of South Kingstown and where we are with affordable housing, and then we're going to let Charlie and Colin discuss some of their examples that they have and give us more of an overview and talk about funding affordable housing. Can we go to the next one? Okay. So, oh, sorry. What is affordable? So affordable housing is most basically having a home that you can afford. It's different for each one of us, but typically what we use as a rule of thumb is 30% of your gross monthly income is what we would say is affordable. If you're spending more than 30% each month, you are going to be cost burdened. According to Rhode Island Housing, nearly 3,000 households in South Kingstown are cost burdened. So we have about little over 10,000 households in South Kingstown, so you're looking at almost a third of the residents of South Kingstown are cost burdened when it comes to housing. So who is eligible for affordable housing? Affordable housing comes in many different forms, and Jamie's going to talk about that a little bit down the road, but it's in two various forms for rentals and home ownership. So opportunities for affordable housing are based on a household's gross annual income, and that's everyone in the home. And the way that they determine this is through the area median income to calculate the affordability. So on the next slide, you'll see the area median income limits for South Kingstown. So basically, whenever we look at this slide, I think it's difficult and overwhelms people, so I don't want to get too in-depth in it, but the main thing to understand is what you would do if you wanted to say, do I qualify for affordable? So you would say, how many people in your household? So for example, if you said a 2-person household, and you said that you made $54,000, that means that you would be eligible for a 60% AMI unit. So when we build affordable housing, and Charlie and Colin will get more into this, but when we build affordable housing, they designate in the beginning what area median income they're going to target. So different developments offer different area median income. So you have to meet these levels. Is that?
Yeah, and just to throw in here as well, if we're looking at the highlighted cell, that's would be 100% level, and that's for a family of 4 that's making $112,000. So that's actually quite a chunk of change. So there's always this preconception that it's only the poorest of the poor, and really this is workforce housing in a lot of cases. It's people who are still making decent money at decent jobs in town, but still qualify for this because the housing is just so darn expensive around here.
So I also wanted to further explain on where you fall with the percentages. So if our area median income in South Kingstown is right about $100,000, we'll bring up a slide in a minute that has the actual figure. It's like $102,000 is our AMI here. So if you make 30% of that, right, then you're in a very low income bracket and you would be eligible for units that meet a 30% AMI. That, in this case, right, in South Kingstown, is mostly served through our housing authority. So Champaign Heights and Fournier Estates, they focus mainly on 50 and below AMIs. And there are other types of affordable housing projects that focus on, let's say, 50 to 100 AMIs. And that's what we typically call workforce housing, because you aren't really at the bottom of the gauge there. You are making money, but it's still not enough money to put you in any kind of a competitive footing in obtaining housing in this area.
Yeah, and to that point, if you look at a single person household at 50% AMI they're making, it would be almost $40,000. So if you broke that out, they would be averaging about $20 an hour. So again, you qualify for affordable housing, but you're making $20 an hour, which is a lot of wages. And Amy will talk a little bit more about that in one of the upcoming slides. So this slide right here is an overview of South Kingstown as a whole. This comes from the Housing Network Fact Book that they put out every year, and it's run through Roger Williams University. It's a great resource that gives you all the information for each town, and then they also talk about the state as a whole and what's going on in the state and some of the challenges that we're facing with housing. But South Kingstown, what I think is important to look at is the median income is $102,000, but the median home price, and this is for 2023, so 2024 has not come out yet, but for 2023, the median home price is, I think it's $579,500, somewhere around there. So in order to qualify to buy a home in South Kingstown right now, an average home, you would have to be making $170,000 a year, which is definitely a challenge for, I think, a lot of the population who is living in South Kingstown right now. And what I was able to do, I am a licensed real estate agent, so I went into the multiple listing service and I looked back for 365 days. And I wanted to see what the sales in South Kingstown look like over the past year. So in 365 days, we sold 239 single-family homes. I only focused on single-family. But of these, 30% were purchased by out-of-state buyers. And of the 239, 36 were purchased from South Kingstown. So as you can see, we are getting a ton of people coming in from different areas because mainly South Kingstowns are having a hard time affording to stay here and buy here. Just keep going. Okay, can we do it after? At the end? Okay. Yeah, we'll do it at the end because I feel like, yes, but I do realize this is sort of, it's a lot of information, but we just wanted to give a background of sort of where we're at right now because I think it's important that when we talk about affordable housing, everyone is on the same page and has a strong base understanding of what the landscape is in South Kingstown right now.
So this is a slide that's going to be hard for you to see, but I will try to describe just by the graphics, the overall graphics. This slide is to try to give people an idea of how big the gap is for lots of working people in our town between what they can afford and what is available to them. And this really brings it out in detail and statistically. So let's start with the solid green lines that are going down sort of central. That is the, I'm going to read you the numbers off my page. So it's around, oh, you can see it up there actually. It's 1441, which is the average rent across the state. That's as if, say, you were going to a real estate agent or Craigslist. That's the average income for, average rent for a two-bedroom unit. So that is I said it was solid, but it's not. That's the green line to the left, most to the left. The next one has to do with with single-family homes. So we'll take both rental and mortgages to give you an idea of what people can afford. So if now we're still on the state, it's around $1,900, almost $2,000 is the median rent. Now we move to South Kingstown and how that compares within the state. And you can see that the average rent is quite a bit higher, from $1,441 to $2,152, and the median mortgage jumps from right around $2,000 to $4,251. So we're just way high in the state. So once we know what the average costs are, the next thing that we put in here is, what do people make? What do people in our town make? So these are salaries for entry level. We're going to begin with the entry level teachers, firefighters, police department. And you can see where that's the red line, the horizontal line. You can see the gap between what someone makes of $45,000 a year, say, for a entry-level teacher, and 30% of that income per month is $1,132. So that person is going to be a long way from being able to afford a rental or either a rental and way far from the mortgage. So then, even moving up, so we might say that entry level, you're not going to expect to be able to buy a house right away. I could have not too many decades ago, but now a person earning $105,000 a year can afford $2,645 a month, which brings them up. Now we're on the yellow line, and still they have not yet reached the ability to get a house in this town. Let's see. So, and then we go up to, again, a more senior level of $112,000 a year, can afford $2,800, and we see that $2,800 still is not meeting anywhere up to the dotted purple line on the far right is the cost of a mortgage. So you can see that someone making $112,000 a year will not be able to afford a home in South Kingstown. So that was to give you a really good idea. And I'm going to go through some of the other. So all of the blue bars, we highlighted some in colors, but all of these blue bars are people who we need in our community. So I'm going to run through just a few of those before I finish. Dining room, cafeteria attendants, waiters, waitresses, bartenders, fast food and counter workers, dishwashers, school bus drivers, bakers, recreation workers, home health aides, passenger vehicle drivers, construction laborers, all the way up, and we haven't even gotten to. They would have to make twice as much as they make now in order to afford living in South Kingstown. So we really wanted to try to highlight that to let you know it's really a big swath of our population that can't afford to stay here.
Right. And one other thing to add too, like you can see consequences of this. Like I know, I think probably the best example, I don't know how many of you were at the Old Tower Hill revitalization charrette process, but there was a really, really good talk in that discussing basically demographic changes in the town as a result of this problem. And you can see things like the proportion of, younger families and school-age children, et cetera, has going way down over time. This was actually a stat from Narragansett I saw, but similar sort of problem that we have, that it was like over the last 10 years, the median age in the town had gone up by 11 point something years. So as in, if they just locked the borders of the town and let everybody stay there, it would have gone up by less than what actually happened. So really, it's hard to, it's hard to have that next generation coming through and making a strong town if the students who are studying here can't afford to stay, if the families can't afford to move in or to stay. So, it's not just hypothetical stuff. It's not just, oh, shoot, my favorite coffee shop is having trouble finding workers. It can be really, really serious fundamental stuff. So that's what we're trying to address here.
So the list that Amy just read, right, these are the people who need affordable housing. So to go back and tie it to that slide about the AMI, that's such a crucial concept to understand because not every affordable housing development covers all of those AMIs. So some projects will focus on the lower ranges, some will focus on the mid ranges, and some may focus on mid to high ranges. So just keep that in mind as we go along.
Okay. Moving on to South Kingstown housing overview with the LMI limits. So I'm not sure how familiar everyone is, but in 2004, we had a low and moderate income housing act in the state of Rhode Island. And the goal for all of the towns was to reach 10%. So 10% of your housing stock, they want to be affordable, anywhere from the 0 to 120% AMI range. South Kingstown, there are 10 towns that actually achieved this goal, so they are exempt, but South Kingstown has been working on it since 2004. And I pulled some of the numbers from the Housing Works fact book. So I started in 2020, and I thought it was important to see what the median single-family home was in 2020, the median household income, and then the number of LMI units and the percent LMI. So a lot of times we'll talk about percent LMI, how are we reaching that goal, and that is a big focus in the town. So I wanted to point out that since 2020, we actually have gone backwards. So at 5.61%, and then this year, so the actual numbers are not out yet, but Brian has done a great job of tracking the LMI units, and it looks like we pulled off, I think it was 144 LMI units because the deed restriction had expired. So in order to qualify as an LMI unit, you have to have a deed restriction on the property, and it has to be for a minimum of 30 years. You can go up to 99 years, but I haven't seen a lot of those. I don't know if you do that. That's right. Okay, Habitat does that. But for the most part, most deed restrictions are 30 years. So what we will continue to see as a town is our LMI number to go down because we're not building as fast as we are taking them off. Would that be fair to say? Yeah. Okay. And you can also see that the median home price has gone up, median household income. So again, this is just creating a larger gap for people, younger people, older people on fixed incomes to actually afford to stay in the town. So the next one I thought would be important in terms of housing stock that we have in town for LMI complexes. Now this is only apartment buildings, so there are deed restricted units that are in terms of single family homes, also duplexes and things of that sort. But for this one, I just focused on the different ones that we have in town. So we have La Casa, which is an elderly complex, which means 62 and over, I believe. The AMI served is 50% or less. Village Gardens, which is run through South Kingstown Housing Authority, that also is elderly and disabled and runs at 50% or less. Indian Run is that use low income tax credits, and Charlie and Colin are going to touch upon this a little bit, but there's different funding sources for all different ones. That one targets the 30 to 60% AMI. And then we have Champaign Heights, Fournier Estates. Those are both the family complexes. And Meadowbrook has a variety of different funding streams. So they have 50% AMI, and then they also have 30 to 60% AMI units available. It's also important, I put this on one of the slides, but I don't think it made it, but the majority of the housing for these complexes is for elderly housing. So I think 65% is elderly, 35% is for families. So there is quite a difference between what's available for this 30 to 50% AMI range in the town in terms of your family size.
So if we go back to that slide that shows what we do have in town, you might have seen it was mostly 50 and below AMIs. What we don't have is what's called the missing middle, which we're going to talk about a lot, and that's the range of people who make 50% to about 100% of the local area median income. So making anywhere from 50 to 100,000 household income. That's what we don't have in town. We're not serving that income bracket well at all.
Great point.
Madam, just
Yeah.
give us we're supposed to be live streaming.
Okay,
Just got a note that it may not be live streaming.
okay.
May give us a moment.
I don't know if everybody could hear what Jamie said. Our live stream is being tweaked and we need to pause for a moment.
My computer says the stream is running.
No one's walking right now. Yes. No, no one was walking around in that screen. That's the beginning of the meeting.
Yeah, Brian, is that okay if people ask questions?
Yeah, go ahead.
Sure. Any questions? Do you want to come to the list and we'll do what we put it up first? Yeah. Liz, do you want to ask her a question? Yeah, can I just do it from here or you want to
Do what we've done before.
maybe? If you can do it out there.
Just in case.
Even though we're not recording, but.
Hi, I'm Liz Karp. I'm on the planning board. My question is about mortgage rates. You didn't specifically discuss that, but as we know, mortgage rates in the last few years have shot up. How is that factored in to the affordable prices for single-family homes?
Yeah, so that's, when you look at, there's two different definitions for affordability. One is that something's deed restricted as an affordable unit, and one is kind of that the individual or family is spending less than 30% of their monthly income on housing. So as far as the deed restriction, it's more about the amount of money you're making, whereas the true affordability, it does take into account the interest rates. So it's, if you're getting a mortgage now, you're probably paying 7.8, 7.9%. That's going to eat up a larger portion of your discretionary income, and so that would affect it. There are some mortgage products out there that are more favorable. So if you are below 80% AMI and in a rural area, which I think most of South Kingstown counts on, you can go through the USDA 502 loan, our 3 houses we just sold were 4.25%, and that's accessible to anybody in that income range who qualifies.
And those numbers are factored in? The mortgage rates of now are factored into the affordability? That's my question, basically. Okay, thank you.
Okay. My name is Barbara Holtzman, and I've got a few questions. First is, why have the prices gone up so so much in the last 4 years?
So the prices have gone up because we essentially aren't building. So I think with COVID, with everything that's happened, people have realized they can work from home. I think people have moved here and the prices just continue to go up. The inventory is low. So there's a ton of competition and people can pay. When I was looking through the MLS, it was fascinating that the majority of the home sales were cash. They were all cash buyers. So a lot of that money is coming from out of state or people, in town, but it is, and it's going to continue to go up, honestly. I don't think, I think in the bubble of 2008, this area was affected, but it wasn't affected to the level of the rest of the country. And I think that we're not going to see home prices go down here anytime soon.
And you mentioned that 30% is from out of state. Are those people from out of state given charged a surcharge of, so that's one question. The other is, what about people who use for Airbnb, and what kind of what are we getting back from them?
Well, the short-term rental registration database just got approved a month or two ago, but right now it's just for a fact-finding mission. So in order for short-term rentals, what you have to do is register. I think you pay a $100 fee, and they are monitoring those. But right now, they're not charging them anything more than the $100 to register each year.
I think someone told me that that each town makes those decisions.
Yeah, I was just going to add your points are really well taken. That's something that we have been discussing in our meetings and preparing how we're going to make recommendations. We've been meeting with Narragansett to see how they have been managing, and that it's definitely on the radar. Really, really important.
Yep. And to that point, Narragansett has had a rental registration database for years now. So they have a database and they run their database with year-round rentals and daily, weekly rentals as well. So they have quite a database of their housing stock, what it's being used for. Ideally, and we have talked about that, we would love for South Kingstown to have something like that as well. I don't think that we can make any decisions on anything until we actually have the data to move forward, but it is something that we would like to see.
So Megan, we have been live and we're still live streaming. Okay. So I apologize for what appeared to be a technical difficulty.
The whole time has been live.
We've been live.
Oh, okay. Okay, great.
There may have been a misunderstanding on logging in
Okay.
and where the live stream was.
As long as we don't have to start over. Okay.
No.
Brian, so the previous slide we've moved past, but I think somewhere you switched because this was the old presentation.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
That's because we had to switch.
Right. One more technical
Okay.
difficulty here. We got to bounce back to screens. So go ahead, Brian.
Any other questions?
Hi, Edie Clem. How much, what factor do the URI rentals go into this data?
I think the answer to that is we don't know, honestly. So again, with the rental registration database, I think that that would be a good start so we can get an idea of the housing and what it's being used for. But right now, we don't know. I know Narragansett is looking into that. We actually have talked with Narragansett Affordable Housing Collaborative, and we're trying to look into that and establish how that is going to affect it. Also, Narragansett, I don't know how aware everyone is, but they have a rental ordinance where you can't have any more than 3 unrelated people in your unit, and they are enforcing it. So what used to be a home that maybe had 8 or 9 people, and they were all in one home, now you need 2 to 3 homes. So I definitely would say that we can see South Kingstown feeling the burden of what's going on, because we are getting, I think our rentals have definitely gone up with URI rentals, but again, we don't have the numbers to. To what?
Joanne Haynes, regarding the students from URI, have you had any discussions with the university highlighting the problem of the students taking over our housing and encouraging them to develop more housing alternatives close to their campus that would both alleviate traffic issues and would open up perhaps housing so that people could in fact have housing to live in here that are working here?
Yeah, so.
Megan, I can
you can
touch
go.
upon that. So the town has had conversations with the University of Rhode Island. I think the university is well aware that their undergraduate program and number of students far outweighs their ability to supply housing on their campus. They do have a request for proposal that is out in a public-private partnership to develop more housing on the campus or near the campus. So they are taking some steps to address the issue. I don't think it's potentially a problem they can completely build their way out of. It's unique to the university system, where most universities throughout the country do not provide a one-for-one room for every student that applies to the campus. In some aspects, freshmen, sophomores are allowed rooms, juniors and seniors, fancy planning term, have to fend for themselves because the allotment goes to the underclassmen. So it's not unique to URI. Even private colleges are dealing with it. University of Connecticut is facing a severe shortage where the private sector is building over 4,000 rooms off campus. So that university chose to let the private sector pick up the slack in the market, because in that community, because it's so kind of rural in nature, they don't have the ability for the single-family rental. There are some scattered throughout Mansfield, but they actually spread to abutting municipalities. So it's not unique. The university is aware of it, and they're making some effort to alleviate that burden on the community.
And I will say the University of Rhode Island they've done a study, or they have a plan that we've looked at, and it's a 35-year plan to add, I want to say 700 beds. So they are aware of the situation and are trying to address it, but it is going to be a slow process, I think. So, yeah. Okay, so types of affordable housing. This is something that Jamie, I think, and Brian were going to touch upon.
Yeah, so we'll just talk about this. This really should be familiar to most people. You're all familiar with the traditional single family, the duplex, but within the community we have triplexes, townhomes, we have conversions of what we would just call estate homes or mansion homes into housing. We have condos, apartments, and multifamily. I think the zoning regulations allow a mix of these uses. They're heavily dependent on location, which is kind of the next topic on this slide, that the primary development has occurred in our villages, which are much more dense. These are the town's central areas. But to the topic of, the college view, we're seeing the conversion of single-family residential units outside of those traditional urban and suburban cores to student housing. So we're seeing, most recently, we had a 8-bedroom home converted to 5 bedrooms into a rental unit. We had another 4-bedroom single-family home just convert to 5 unrelated individuals, which was a owner plus potential 4 rentals. And we're handling probably 2 to 4 a year of single-family residential conversions to that rental market for students. With regards to the affordability aspect, again, they can fill different markets, but primarily all affordable units are required to be for sale or rental, and that's rental year-round. So an affordable unit, typically a college student, is not someone who can take an affordable unit because most college students are still on their parents' or guardians' income tax, therefore they can't qualify under the income levels for those units. And most college dorm developers can't enter the market on the dormitory side as an affordable project because of that main issue of a student wouldn't meet the affordability criteria, nor is that the market the town is trying to go after. With regards to those affordable units that are either sold or rented, there is a requirement under our local ordinances and as well as state law to have a minimum of 30 years deed restricted. So if a market was to come online in 2024, it becomes restricted only for 30 years. So what that means is a developer was doing a 10-unit project. Under our current regulations, 3 of those units would be deemed affordable. Those would be affordable for 30 years. If they were a condo, a market rate condo in that project could sell between $800,000 and $1.2 million. The affordable unit would be restricted at roughly plus or minus $300,000 depending on the interest rate. But in year 31, that $300,000 unit goes full market rate. So someone in year 29 is holding a lottery ticket for year 31 because that's when they're going to get the appreciation. So a wonderful opportunity to build wealth within a family would be to be able to hold an affordable unit for 30 years, and in year 31 you have substantial appreciation. One thing that should be noted on the chart where it showed some fluctuations in the percentage of affordable units in town, and you may see that it was at 5, and then it went to 4.8, and then it went to 5, and then it went to 4.6. That doesn't mean that South Kingstown isn't doing anything for affordability. Houses may be dropping off the affordability list because they're no longer deed restricted after 30 years, or in some of the formulas for credit, it's based on the mortgage that you hold. So if someone has a veteran loan or a farmer's home loan, if that mortgage is paid off or converted, we'll lose the affordability rating for that unit. So it's not that South Kingstown did anything wrong or did anything not in support of affordable housing. It just means that some of the units that were on that list came off that list, and we haven't supplemented it one for one. As I mentioned too, we have local regulations that any development in excess of 6 units or 6 lots is required to have a minimum of 20% affordable. So the town has those regulations in place, but we're beholden to the marketplace. So someone would say, that's great that every 6 units that a developer proposes creates affordable housing. The problem there is if no developers develop anything over 6 units, 0 affordable units come to the marketplace in South Kingstown. And we have a lot of projects that have been approved, but they've been sitting on shelves. The ability to borrow money at 5 and 6% on the commercial side doesn't exist anymore, hasn't existed since pre-COVID. Now commercial rates are hovering around 9 and 10%. So if I'm a developer with labor rates extremely high, building materials extremely high, and interest rates extremely high, if I can hold, I may hold so that my cost to develop is less perhaps a year, 2 or 3 years from now. So it's not that the town isn't doing anything in some aspects, it's that we have a number of projects on hold that aren't changing those numbers. I'm just going to back up real quick. I don't want to take up too much time, but we'll go back through the numbers that Megan talked about, and we did this in a presentation with town council, and this was about 4 or 5 months ago. There were literally only a few houses available in town. There was one for $349,000, and everyone may say, great, $349,000. That house was $624 a square foot because it was only 560 square feet. So in reality, someone was selling a house lot that happened to have a structure on it for $349,000. That house still required $92,000 of income to be able to afford a 500 square foot home. The next most affordable home in the marketplace was $599,000. It was 1,500 square feet, which equates to just under $400 a square foot, and required $160,000 of income to be able to afford that house. There was another house for $615,000. That was 1,900 square feet, $321,000, and again, $160,000 worth of income. Occasionally, you'll see a few $499s drop in and out of the marketplace. I would categorize those of needing some sweat equity to those, but that's still, those units that hover right around $500,000 still need $132,000 of income. So the stuff that was talked about tonight of what you're trying to accomplish for the working class entry level on what's available, which isn't much, is $132,000 a year. So 2 entry levels, school teachers, town hall employees, do not, between the 2 individuals, make $132,000 a year. So that's the difficulty, and that's the things that Habitat for Humanity and our Narragansett folks grapple with all the time, and that's how they try and bring housing to the marketplace for those people versus the 50 and 60% LMI. So again, it's a struggle. It doesn't mean we need to lose hope. We have a couple of council members who are here, Patty Alley and Greg Sweet are here. The town manager is here, Jim Manny. The deputy town manager, Luke Murray, is here. So there are people interested in affordable housing in this community. The town council just approved $75,000 for us to hire an architectural firm to look at 3 properties in town and how those properties can potentially support housing on the affordability level, combination of market rate and affordable, and how many units the town could supply. So we're going through that endeavor right now with Union Studios and a small team internal to the town staff. So again, efforts are being made. It's just a slow, arduous process that we're not always in control of. We don't have Colin could probably build more units if he had more money and more staff. Our friends in Narragansett and Newport could do more if you had more resources and more ability. And even if you have more resources, you don't always have the land to do it on, and the cooperation from a community. So, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jamie. So I think that's a good segue for us to meet our experts who hopefully can help us come up with some ideas and collaborate on things we can do in town to start building affordable. So we have Charlie Thomas Davison, who's the Director of Real Estate at Women's Development Corporation. She also is an architect as well and has been doing this for 16 years. and Colin Penny, who's the executive director at Habitat for Humanity. And total, they have 33 years in the industry, and I would venture to say built hundreds of affordable housing units. Okay. So if, Colin, you want to start? We have your slides.
Sure. Charlie's first.
Also, maybe if you could talk a little bit about your organization, brief overview.
Yeah. So Women's Development Corporation started in around 1979. It began as kind of a CDC, a community development group, in the sense that it focused a lot on the west side and the south side of Providence. And since then, we've grown to become a regional developer. So we develop across the state of Rhode Island, as well as some in southeast Massachusetts, and have done some consulting work in Connecticut with other small CDCs, to sort of advise them. Over that time, I've been there 9 years, but over that time, we have developed about 700 units of rental housing, all of which we still own. We've never sold a rental housing unit that we've developed. And we have developed some home ownership in the past, but mostly no longer do that as our main business line since the kind of the housing crisis of 2009. Yeah. So we're a nonprofit. I'm sorry, I should have said that. So we're a nonprofit. So we, we have a board of directors, which we're responsible to. And we also have a property management company. So HOC stands for Housing Opportunities Corporation. That's our nonprofit property management company. Managing affordable housing is a kind of nuanced and niche service. There's a lot of income certifications, things like that. So in addition to the services that we actually bring to tenants who oftentimes could use, the benefit of, workforce development services or, coordinating benefits and that kind of thing, there's also just a lot of compliance. So there's a whole lot of income certifications that have to be done annually, as well as a ton of layers of inspections from different lenders, HUD, Rhode Island Housing, other, investors. So it's not something that typically, kind of your average property manager would have the skill set to do. So because we do that with our 700 plus units, we also third-party property manage for about 300 other units in Rhode Island, usually for small nonprofits that have special populations, so folks with disabilities, that kind of thing. Because we do that, we have a pretty robust facilities management, group, because we basically are responsible for upkeep of things that we developed 40 years ago, and newer stuff. So that's kind of the background of our organization, if that's good. In terms of what I have to show for slides here, like I said, we've done 700 plus units. I'm going to just show you part of 3 locations, developments, that I think are of interest to this group because they're South County based. So we have other things in Providence, we have things in Woonsocket, like I said, southeast Massachusetts. I don't know if folks are familiar, some may be and some are not, but one of our projects is called Shannock. Well, we call it Shannock Falls. We know that's actually a location. We don't own the location, but of Shannock Falls, the project, it comprises of 2 locations. One is in Charlestown and one is in Richmond. So what you see here is 11 units in Charlestown, on the Charlestown side of the Shannock Falls village. And the house that's orange there, that was a historic single-family house. And kind of to Jamie's point, it was once kind of a mansion-type house, a wealthy property owner with a large property who since, the family no longer owned it. And that was retrofitted into 2 apartments, a smaller ground floor apartment and then a 2-story apartment above. And then we built the 9 townhouses. And so what you're seeing there is one of the townhouses, which would be, 3 units per building. So that's one of the buildings. And then, so the part of Shannock Falls, the development, also on the Richmond side, is 32 similar townhouses. There's some differences due to site layout that are kind of up a steep hill that we had to blast through granite to get up there, and then set back off the road, these 32 units. They're primarily 3-bedroom units, so family housing. Some are 2 bedrooms, and I believe the ADA units, the accessible units that are the smaller orange are, I think they were 1 bedroom. I mean, we try to make these look like any other housing, and I think that was on your slide, but you didn't end up getting there, which is this should be indistinguishable from other construction. It's high quality, there's a ton of oversight. These are meant to last because the influx of money to build it is the money. And after that, the rents do not produce enough income to do significant, upgrades to the property. It's designed to be maintained, but it's not designed to be sort of upgraded. It needs at that point a refinance and a remodel at some point. So they're high quality construction meant to blend in with the community, be appropriate to the location. And, while we're looking at it, kind of the trees haven't developed there at this point, a more modern picture would show a couple years later that it's grown. It has a community building. We provide services there, so we try to serve our community. Might go on to the next one, I guess. So just to give you, this is the one that we've most recently completed. It's been occupied for a year, or just over a year. It was January of 23 was when our first folks were in. This is called Pineview Apartments in Exeter off of Route 2. If you know that area, it's just down from the Oak Harbor shopping village down there where the pizza and the gas station and all that stuff. And so in this case, I should have mentioned that Richmond is about 7 acres of developed land on a property that we own that was 59 acres, I think. So the remaining part of that parcel is in conservation easement to never be developed. It does have some ancillary stuff like a well. It has some septic leach fields, but it's not to ever be developed. In this case, this is a 7 acre and change parcel that we purchased off of the abutting property owner. Similarly, it's a long road to get in, set back off the road, and this is 40 units, primarily 2 bedrooms with, I think, 5 or 6 1-bedrooms, laundry, property management, that kind of thing. So, we're proud of these. I think that, we try to, I am an architect, so I tend to get like a little involved in the design, and, we wanted to be proud of it, and you want the folks living there to be proud of it. I think it's easier to manage, operate, and use as an example of what affordable housing can be, not what people, I think it is when they look at like housing authority type housing and don't realize that it doesn't have to be that way. Oh, okay, yeah, so she was asking about the AMI. They range from 30 to 60. Most affordable housing until pretty recently goes up to 60% AMI because of one of the primary funding sources, which we'll get to in a minute, is called the Low Income Housing Tax Credit. So anything above 60% AMI isn't eligible. There's a newer way of structuring a deal that you called income averaging, where as long as the development averages to 60%, so it can be as high as 80. So you can have 80% AMI units as long as you have some 30 and 50 to offset it, and the math pencils out that it averages less than 60. It's kind of a headache of compliance, but it's, it creates a more natural community, and it serves that missing middle that you were talking about, which has been kind of classically left behind. If you're $1 over that 60%, you're not eligible. So we have some 30s and 50s. Those come with a project-based voucher usually. They're subsidized with a housing authority voucher. And then the rest are just working class folks who are paying their rent. It's just lowered below the market rate per the deed restriction and the funding sources, which we'll get into. Sorry.
So how long did it take to build this?
I mean, to go from kind of acquiring the land all the way. It took us a couple of years to get the land. Okay. We paid about $1 million for it. It came with some engineering and some town approvals, so you pay for that too. You pay for some of the work that's been done. I mean, there wasn't any physical work done, but some of the planning work. The funding cycle is annual, so if you kind of miss it one year, you have to wait another year. So that's part of the challenge. But in this case, we were able to purchase the land with a land bank loan and then pay that off with the next funding cycle. I think it probably, your answer is maybe 4 years, 5 years before it was occupied. Okay. Shannock, it was similar, but it actually has a very storied past and goes all the way back to even a Supreme Court challenge in Richmond, and I would say that started about 20 years ago. But the modern version of Shannock, about 4 years.
So when you say Pineview is servicing 60% AMI, went back to the AMI slide. I just want to point out that if it's a one-person household, that means the max they could make would be 47,200, and then if it's two people, it'd be 54,000. And there's also, the lower limit is at 50, or it's somewhere like 50 to 60%, 60 being the max. And
that is a little bit of a property management decision to make.
Okay.
So if you're $1 over 50% AMI, you're not qualified for that unit. If it's deed restricted at 50 and you're 51, you can't have it. So there's this, even another missing middle. There is a pretty big gap between 51% and 60. I mean, it makes a difference. And so since we try not to rent to anybody over 30% of their income, if you're like at 55% of the area median income and these expenses exceed 30%, we have to decide, one, would we take the risk to rent it to you if you're a bit cost burdened? Because potentially if you can't pay the rent and you're in arrears at that point, we try to work with you, but eventually it becomes, potentially an eviction case. We don't want that. So we don't want to rent people things they can't afford. The other is we could choose to reduce the rent. We could give you a lower rent. The problem is we have investors and we run on a really tight margin. So to sort of artificially reduce the rent to house somebody, if there's other folks coming behind that can pay, it's hard to do that, even though certainly we're a mission-based organization. I don't have a philosophical problem with it, but we do have to stay in business, so.
And then the one last question I have is, a couple of years ago when it started, the rent was, I think, 1,000 something. Do you have any idea what the rent?
I was supposed to look that up, right? I can find out, but I don't recall. But that is those rents, I should say, because we didn't explain that. The AMI also is directly related to what the rent is allowed to be. These are set by HUD. I mean, it's through some census work and some other work that they determine what the area median income, and even which towns count as the same. You probably saw there was 15 towns on there that were considered, the same. And yet, of course, there's variation. The rent is set to effectively be 30% of what that median income would be and can go no higher other than approved changes annually that we can make. And so that is basically math. I mean, there's tables that will tell you what the maximum rent can be for those units based on that. The other thing I would say is if you move in and 5 years later the area median income has gone up, we can only raise your rent by a certain percentage every 6 months. So you still see basically like a rent control, like we would be used to in another setting. We can't just raise it just because they said we could. I'm sorry, I don't have the answer to
No,
what the
but
rent
I think it's important just to know that the housing is subsidized. The rent is not exorbitantly high, and that it's about $1,000 somewhere in that range.
Yeah, I can look it up.
No, that's okay. Colin, I think you are up next.
Good evening. Again, thanks for having me. South County Habitat for Humanity serves exclusively Washington County. And we work pretty much exclusively in the homeownership field. So we're unique compared to just the vast majority of affordable housing developers in the state in that we only do homeownership. To date, we've served through our various programs 127 families throughout Washington County, and we're going into our 35th year of working down here. We actually have two of our founding members of Habitat sitting in the front row, so they've been here in South Kingstown working away the Bancross for 35 years now, so it started in their living room, so always great to see them continuing to support the work we do. we really work to design the houses to fit the communities that we're in. We build single family and duplexes. If we're in an area that, row houses, townhouses made more sense, we can really adapt our building style to fit in. So up there on the left is one of 4 houses that we have off of Old North Road, right off the URI campus. It was actually a partnership with the university where we were able to swap some land, and Greek Life actually raised over $500,000 to help us build that, and it was largely built by students from the university. On the right there is a duplex we did in Exeter in 2018. And again, just shows that we can, whether single family, duplex, whatever the case might be. Then if you want to go on. This is our current project. This is Cardinal Lane in Hopkinton. It was, again, back when women's development decided to step their toe into homeownership. They built 6 units on the street and then decided to get back into rental when the housing crisis happened. So partnering with women's development, we were able to purchase the land, redesign the comp permit, and build these 7 houses. So the first 3 there on the right are completely occupied. 2 of them are 3-bedroom, 1.5 bath, about 1,280 square foot. And the middle one there that's fully sodded in is a 4-bedroom, 2-bath, about 1,340. And then we have 4 houses underway currently. All these houses are zero energy certified and will be net zero as soon as we put the solar panels on there. So we build our houses, even without the solar panels, they're about 90% more efficient than a code-built house in Rhode Island. So the energy bills for these homeowners should be little to nothing. And again, that's one of the ways that we try to not just create an affordable product for them to purchase, but an affordable product for them to maintain. Again, we focus on durable materials that are going to last. But in the end, one of the unique things about the homeownership units is it's a one-time investment. And again, we'll talk about the different ways that we get investments to build. But after that, they're homeowners. They're on their own. We're always there to support and lend tools if they're fixing things up or making renovations, but they're really on their own. They're homeowners just like anybody else. They have a 33-year mortgage. Again, we primarily partner with USDA currently because they do have some great mortgage products that are below market rate for affordable housing in rural communities. When we built that duplex, it was taking us about 18 months to 20 months to build that duplex. These 7 houses we're going to complete in just about 2 years. So we're really ramping up. And then if we want to go to the next slide, this is our proposed subdivision in Westerly. And this will be 22 single-family housing units. If you know where the Haversham Tavern is on Route 1, we're kind of tucked up right behind there. So a nice place, walking distance to Walmart, to South County Health, 10-minute bike ride to the beach. Pretty great spot, 5 minutes from my house, so it's an easy commute to work. And so we're currently going through a comp permit with the town of Westerly. The comprehensive permit is one of the best tools that affordable housing developers have. It allows you to work more or less exclusively with the planning department and really ask for anything. It doesn't mean you're going to get everything you ask for, but it allows you a lot more variability. So this is kind of our largest project, and the plan is, again, I said we did a duplex in 18 months. Our plan is, once funded, to build all 22 units and have them occupied in less than 18 months. So we know that we're in the midst of a housing crisis, and we're really looking at new technologies to build faster. So about 20 of these will be built off-site in a modular factory. It's different than manufactured housing, which has a bit of a bad rep for a good reason. Modular housing, there was one in Narragansett that was built. It's a $1.1 million house, and it came out of the same factory that we're going to be building these affordable housing units. We'll still continue to use our volunteer model. Habitat uses about 1,200 volunteers every year to help us build our houses. It helps us keep our costs down and get the community engaged. And so we'll stick build 2 of them, and they'll still be finished work on the 20 others. We had talked about long-term affordability. We do use a ground lease. So one of the ways that we're able to sell the houses for less is we don't sell the underlying land. We maintain ownership of the land as Habitat for Humanity and lease it to the families for a whopping $30 a month. They have the same rights and uses as they would as if they owned the underlying land. But it allows us to secure the affordability. So if they transfer the house onto a family member, that family member will sign a new 99-year ground lease. If they decide to sell it, Habitat has the right of first purchase. So we're able to purchase it, fix it up, and put a new family in there. Again, allowing for some equity and wealth building. And if we decide not to, they can go to the market and sell it, but they still have to sell it to another family at or below 80% AMI. So, and then that new family will lease it from Habitat, and that 99 years will be restarted. So it really ensures that the housing stock that Habitat creates stays for kind of a permanent source of affordable housing.
And how much typically is the mortgage in terms of monthly payment? Do you know?
We're seeing right now, again, in addition to interest rates growing up, insurance rates have been increasing for most of Rhode Island. We're seeing, I want to say the families on Cardinal Lane, the first 3 in, are under $1,200, all in, taxes, insurance, ground lease, principal, interest, all in. So, we're looking at that range. As income levels are going up, we'll probably be increasing the sale price of our houses just to make it more sustainable. But we still stick to that principle that no family or individual will be spending more than 30% of their monthly income on their housing costs when they go to buy the Habitat home.
And Colin, you said that you focus on 80% AMI. Is that the limit?
Right now, it's 80% and below. I'd say the vast majority, because we do have to qualify these individuals and families for a mortgage. The underwriting standards for USDA are the same as if you were to go to Washington Trust or Rhode Island Housing. So we bring the families in. They're working with us for about 12 to 18 months. They help build their own houses in lieu of a large down payment. And they're working on their budgets, their credit. But yeah, 60 to 80% AMI is really what we find that most of us, which means we get a lot of folks out of the healthcare industry, we get a lot of teachers, a lot of town workers. Again, I'm in Westerly, and when I presented to the town council, I reminded them that out of their 319 employees in the town, 2 could afford the median sale price of a home in Westerly. So probably not a big surprise that it's about $35,000 less than the median sale price here in South Kingstown.
Next slides, we are going to talk about funding these projects. So this is Colin and Charlie, because this is very complex, and I think we all have a lot to learn. But I want to say that one of the reasons why we decided to have this meeting was because Amy and I went to another board meeting, and I think they were talking about affordable housing, and the big question was, how do we fund it? And so I think people were thinking for-profit developers, and how can we do it with the costs of labor and the cost of materials. But that's why we wanted to bring in the experts over here, because this is what they do. And when they build their projects, essentially it's at no cost to the town, right? So I think that was one of the questions in the meeting that we had been at, was how can we do it? Does the town have to pay $9 million or $10 million to develop Wakefield School or something like that? But if you do work with a nonprofit developer, that's actually an advantage, because you wouldn't be, as taxpayers, paying anything. The nonprofits would handle all of the funding for that.
And, okay, before I do that, I did look up that rent, Megan, so I just wanted to say that the current rental price for a 2-bedroom unit at 60% AMI is $1,518. If it went all the way up to 80% AMI, which we're looking at in that income averaging scenario, all the way up to $2,024, which is significantly reduced actually from the market. It just sounds incredibly expensive, and in fact is quite close to my own mortgage payment.
No, it is. It's hard to wrap your mind around. The other thing I wanted to point out is, so a 2-bedroom for HUD, what they do is they have a Section 8 vouchers, which we haven't talked about, but Section 8 vouchers in South Kingstown, the allowable limit is $2,832. So if somebody has a Section 8 voucher in South Kingstown, they could find a unit on the market that would be $2,832, which is crazy. That's, yeah.
Yeah, and for the lower income folks, if they had no subsidy, I mean, the 30% people for a 2-bedroom would be paying $759. What we find as the manager, however, is that doesn't get close to paying the actual operating expense to run the development. And so we tend to seek housing authority vouchers and such to kind of bring them back up to what would be effectively like the 60% baseline. because it just doesn't pay the bills. But this income averaging allows a little bit of flex there, because if the higher income units kind of offset some of the costs of the lower in terms of just operating expenses. Because we spend between $7,500 and $9,500 per unit per year just to operate the development. So you have to have that. So anyway, I wanted to say that I had looked that up. But in terms of funding, and this first slide is a lot less than the next one. The next one kind of shows this vast array of funding sources. But I think what Megan is responding to is folks not understanding how the housing's financed in the first place. And by the end of this, you're not going to either, because there's so much to it. But I think, some of the important things to note, that it isn't taxpayer money, it isn't town money. I mean, certainly towns are, and do sometimes, contribute funds toward, they might offer $500,000 or a piece of land or, something in kind, but that's not the way the housing is financed. Some of the items are listed above, so you have a project and what might go into it. Project-based vouchers, again, is basically a Section 8 voucher that's assigned to a unit, not a person. And so as the developer, you're allowed to assume that income will be there. It's a 15-year contract. And so we have investors, we go to the investor and say, we know we're going to get paid from the Housing Authority for this unit, which makes it on par with the others that are the typical, like the 60% AMI unit. Tenants can come with tenant-based vouchers. You can be a lower income person in a higher income unit if the voucher will pay the difference, and that's true on market rate housing as well. So that's more of an operating issue, because that allows people to pay the rent. But the others are more of a development source. So the biggest one being the low-income housing tax credit program. And you either kind of know about it or you don't, and a lot of people don't. But I mean, it started in 1988 or something like that. And actually, the very first low-income housing tax credit project in Rhode Island was one of ours in Providence. What it does is it just gives a direct tax credit to somebody who has taxable income to offset. So a lot of times they're banks, they can be investment funds, they can be companies. Disney, I mean, they don't do it in Rhode Island, but in California they buy tax credits all the time. And what they do is the tax credit is awarded only to a nonprofit, but we don't have any tax liability. And so we sell the credit to the investor and they give us cash for it. They give us cash now at a reduced rate. So let's say they get $10 million of credit. They might sell it to us for $9,200,000. So, but they give us the money now. So we use it to build the project now. They collect their credit over 10 years. So it takes them 10 years to actually get back the 10 million, which is why there's a discount. It's that they call it the time value of money, but you put your money up first, it's at a cost, right? And it's at their risk, because if anything goes wrong, the IRS will not give them the tax credit in subsequent years if the compliance is not in order. And that's why it's so important to have a good developer, owner, a good property manager with all kinds of compliance, and that means tenant file review, income review, and all of that, because any glitch in what we do and the investor is at a loss because they gave us the money up front. They find ways to come back for it, but I mean, they're never, they're always going to be mindful of who their investor is. But like I said, it could be banks, for instance, anybody who has excess, income and liability, tax liability. So that's considered private equity. I mean, it is. It's not a government source. All it is a tax credit. There's no money coming from the government. It's just taxes not collected. And of course, there's lots of models for tax credits across our whole, tax system for other things. So that's probably the biggest driver that usually pays for at least half of a project. Then the other stuff comes in, because it's like, how do you pay for the other half? Home funds, housing bonds, I mean, all these things are covering those gaps. So there's kind of like these buckets of money. And actually, I said a typical affordable rental project may have 5 to 12 sources of funding. It's incredibly complicated. So maybe go on to the next one. Yeah. I'm sure you can't totally see what's on the right, but focusing on what's on the left for a minute, you wouldn't necessarily have all of these, but you might have up to 12 or 13 of these. I mean, you could. A first mortgage. So I just did want to point out that we do take a bank note. It is driven by how much income we have. So when we show the tenants, we show the rents, we show the expenses, whatever's left, whatever mortgage we can support to their, they're a bank. Rhode Island Housing is a bank. It could be Citizens Bank. It could be whatever. We have to show that we can pay the mortgage with the debt service coverage like any mortgage, But we do take, between a couple $100,000 up to $5 million mortgage, depending on the project. I already talked about the low-income housing tax credit. That's been a successful program for creating housing. There is also a historic tax credit, and so that's obviously for existing buildings, but like we have a development in in Providence, that is eligible for about $4 million of federal historic tax credit. So we probably cost a couple $100,000 in consultants to get it. You have to pay to get it, but the investor buys that tax credit as well. State tax credit is a new source that isn't quite available yet, but is coming down the pike, and I think will be a valuable resource. A lot of other states have it already. We've been kind of slow to adopt it, but it will be a good gap-filling source as well. The Building Homes RI, BHRI we call it, you might recall, what year did we do that? 2001. 2001 was the state housing bond that folks voted for. That ultimately created this BHRI fund that, we've now, just as of this year, I think dedicated the last of those dollars to projects. And Colin's going to talk in the next slide about, that coming up in the election cycle, but a really important source. But don't go there yet. He's going to do it, but I'll go quicker. Community Development Block Grant, some people might have heard of it, CDBG money. That is one where towns can participate in the sense that if you're an entitlement community, that's like Providence, there's, 9 or something, they have their own allocation, but otherwise it's a statewide allocation, and towns can apply with they're the applicant with a sponsor to get up to $500,000 toward a project. It can be used for acquisition, it can be used for construction, it can be used for a lot of things. So that is a place where the town, if they're supportive, can work with a developer to get funds. A lot of these things that I think is important to point out, these are federal allocations to the state for these purposes. This isn't, it's not a blue state, red state thing. It's based on population size. And we are allocated a certain number of dollars of all of these funds to be distributed by Rhode Island Housing or the State Department of Housing for the purpose of affordable housing, or in the case of CDBG, there's some other community development purposes. But that is to say, this is what the money is meant to be spent on, so that's what it's spent on. Some of the others, the AHP thing, that's another one that's kind of that's from the Federal Home Loan Bank. That is a different source. It allows banks to participate by giving reduced rate loans and some grant money to help come in early. It's one of the sources that will come in early before all the other commitments are there. Housing Trust Fund, Capital Magnet Fund, they all are kind of in these, state allocation buckets to be given out. They have different priorities, so certain projects are better suited for one or the other. Pre-development loans is an important one because that is the money that comes in the first couple years. These days, we might spend, between $300,000 and maybe $800,000 getting a project ready through planning approval, all the drawings, kind of ready to build and close, and that's not even on acquisition. So that's pretty pricey, but it has done that with engineering and legal fees, probably more often like $400,000, $500,000 per project. Site acquisition grant was a really great source that came out, which was ARPA money. It's no longer available, but that was actually grant funds, and we were able to buy properties off the market and compete with market rate buyers to buy properties because the money was immediately available with a minimal amount of due diligence, as opposed to our other sites, which sometimes take years to acquire. Sponsor loan is us. So sometimes we will loan in our own money to the project to make it work. Deferred developer fee means I don't take my whole salary. I do get paid, but we basically work for years before we get paid. And so we as an organization will defer some of our fee in order to close a gap on a project, and that can later be paid if the project has cash flow, slowly, and it might be 0 one year and it might be 10,000 another year, and it's not guaranteed. Operating subsidy is just money that can be kicked in to cover some of the lower income folks or some of the social services that might be needed. And then land donation I put on because it's a powerful tool in talking about, or even if it's just a ground lease with a town for a nominal amount of money. Land is very expensive, it's hard to get. And working with a town to use a town-owned property, whether it's donated or leased, is so powerful because you're not competing with escalating prices of real estate, and it kind of stops the clock and allows the thing to develop and get a project that the town and the developer are happy with for long-term, use of it, so that we're not rushing through just because we're trying to save a little bit of interest money on a loan or something. And then I won't even go through it. I just wanted to show you how many line items on the right are in uses. This is why it's incredibly expensive to do affordable rental housing. There's so much compliance, there's so many attorneys, there's so many layers of investors and lenders and, environmental and everything, that every single one of those is a category that has to be paid for. So anyway. It's a lot. I think the ownership is slightly less sources, right?
Yeah, so the good news is my slide's really simple. The bad news is because I don't have access to any of that money. The state definitely prioritizes rental, and there's a lot of great rental projects out there, and we support all of our nonprofit rental developers. But the state has decided to put the vast majority of those programs into rental, with kind of the big one being the bond funds that can go to home ownership. I have to say, every time I sit through a LIHTC, low-income housing tax credit meeting, I'm not sorry I don't have access to that funds, because I don't want to touch it with a 10-foot pole, because it's incredibly complicated and really, really expensive to manage. So this is kind of a rough breakdown of how we're funded. So because we do sell the houses, we do get money back at closing through the mortgage. And so, right now our houses are selling for right around $200,000. Again, we're just selling the improvement, not the loan, or not the land. So that's what our Westerly development will be, about $200,000 a house. We do get about 15% from private donations. That could be in kind, donated services, folks who donate to our campaigns, letter writing, all that sort of fun stuff, fundraisers. And then about 30% comes from usually either the housing bond or a program called the Housing Investment Fund, which is internal money from Rhode Island Housing. So it's sometimes a little bit easier to work with because it doesn't have all the compliance of all the state agencies. They kind of create their own rules around it. So sometimes it could be a little bit more malleable if you have kind of a unique program or unique project. So we've had a lot of success for that. HIF tends to be about $1 to $2 million a year, so it's a pretty small pot. But the housing bond is really our focus, and I mention it because the budget that was just released on Friday did have a $120 million proposed housing bond. So we've done, I believe, 4 housing bonds since 2006, totaling about $190 million. The most recent was in 2021 for $50 million, and again, 2 weeks ago, the last of that money was divvied up. I think there was about $4 million remaining that got passed out about 2 weeks ago. Again, about $120 million housing bond, and one of the big differences is the proposal from the Secretary of Housing was that up to a third, or 30 million, depending on how you interpret the legislation, would go to home ownership. Out of that 50 million, I believe about 3.5% went to home ownership. So the vast majority, again, went to rental. Most of that 3.5% came to me. So we're appreciative of that. But having that investment in home ownership is a huge change. Nothing's set in stone. Again, it's come out of finance. It needs to be approved through the budget process. So there's still time to make some tweaks and changes between now and June 20th, when we're hoping the state budget will be passed, and then it'll go back out to the voters. So it is something that'll be on the ballot hopefully in November for approval from Rhode Island taxpayers and voters. So we do, if that is on there, which we're very hopeful, we do encourage you to support that housing bond. It really is the biggest tool for an organization like Habitat, and just a really critical tool for the housing developers. The pot of money that was just given out was $105 million. Again, the vast majority of that was COVID relief funds, ARP funds. I believe they had about $340 million in asks. So, a lot more money was asked for and projects were out there and working on getting developed in affordable housing than there was money available. So this $120 million over 4 years would fill part of that gap, definitely not all of it, but it's a great step. Developers such as us and Women's Development, kind of knowing that these COVID funds were coming, have really ramped up, gotten really creative with projects, invested a lot of our own internal funds because it costs a lot of money to buy the land, do the engineering, go through the permitting process. And so we're excited, hopefully to have access to really continue that momentum, because we know it's such a critical and important part of what we need here in Rhode Island.
All right, Megan, we're about 90 minutes in. Unless there's anything significant here, I think we ought to have some questions and engagement with the people.
So
Okay.
that was a lot. But wanted to open it up and see if anyone had any questions, ask the experts.
Yep.
Yeah, okay. Tom Rutliff. My question is, do you have experience with things such as schools, the renovation and retrofitting for housing?
We have done a few adaptive reuse type projects. So in fact, a historic school in Rehoboth, Massachusetts is one we're working on now. It's kind of a historic building. So, I mean, in that case, the building's pretty, has deteriorated a lot, but we're keeping, the front of it, keeping, the character of it and sort of building onto the back. We've also are currently working on a project that was an old furniture store. Originally, the original building built in 1910 or something. It's sort of aggregated over time. So we have reused some. I will say not every building, and I don't know these buildings well, but the building itself may not be reusable. The land may be where the real value is. And of course, the utilities coming in and all the infrastructure is significant because it's quite expensive to develop that stuff. But I don't know those properties well, so I'm not speaking to the quality of the building.
What about on the funding side? Are there any particular funds that apply?
I mean, I think the land, either whether it was a land donation or a 99-year land lease with the town or whatever, that probably has the most significant financial impact. I don't know, other than if it were historic or something where you can leverage funds that are dedicated to that. I don't know of any that would be specific for that, but it's also something to investigate.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, some of the bond fund previously had been towards what would be considered rundown or blighted properties. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure if that's put into this current bond. I know it's been in the past two. So I know the schools aren't necessarily blighted right now, but there could be an opportunity if the schools or other buildings that have really run down but need reinvestment to bring them back to life. It wouldn't surprise me if that is in the bond again.
And just really quickly, I'll say this is really competitive funding. So they only funded a third at best, and that's with a glut of money from ARPA. So any project that has anything going for it at all is much stronger. So if it has town support, if it has, they look for resources that aren't theirs. Is there some commitment of other resources? And certainly land or a sub-rate kind of lease payment or something is considered, but as is real cash money as well. But, so it's just more competitive with great support. You go in and show that the project's really feasible and has town support. That does make your project funded much faster and more reliably than others.
Yeah, and I would say, if you look at the funding, it doesn't tend to come down here. I could say out of that $105 million, I think there was a little bit of money that was used for affordable units to reinvest in them and get them fixed up. None of that money came down here. I think there was one 55 and older project in North Kingstown, and that's the closest, and that was right on the West Greenwich line. So, we really need to get the towns involved because they really do look at that town involvement, the town support, the community support, the investment, whether it's through a town affordable housing fund, which I know South Kingstown has set up, or through the donation of land, waiving certain permit fees, those sort of things. It'll go a long way to convincing folks that there is a need down here, because when I go up to the State House, that's what I hear, unless it's our reps down here, who we have a lot of wonderful reps that are very supportive of housing. there's a misnomer that there's not a need down here. And I think that's something we really need to change, and the towns could go a long way to helping us do that.
One other thing is that another competitive point is the cost per unit to develop. So anything that makes the cost per unit cheaper is, an advantage. But often that's not the case in South County. I mean, we're bringing serious infrastructure into all the ones that I showed you. So for instance, with the school building, with having water, gas, power, having land, being closer to the road, like all of those things along with town support and a path through planning and zoning that is not, a 5 years process, all reduces costs. So not only is there the real visible support from the town, but there's also the slightly more invisible part, which is the money we didn't spend fighting it, but instead working collaboratively. And that, for instance, Pineview was collaborative with the the planning department, the planning board, and was significantly cheaper than in Richmond.
Megan, if I can just ask Charlie and Colin a quick question. What is your typical sweet spot for your per unit acquisition costs? Where would you like to be versus where you really are?
Yeah, I mean, it's so all over the place. I mean, our initial investment in our project in Westerly is way more than we ever put into any project. The land was just shy of $1 million. The permitting and engineering is close to $300,000, and we still just have raw dirt and no utilities or roads. So, but because there's more opportunities than there were, that it changes it a lot. Our typical, we're about $320,000 a unit right now as far as our build out costs. That one is closer to $400,000 a unit because of the additional infrastructure and land purchase that we had to do.
That's a good question. And I would say ours also varies significantly. Obviously less is more, but anything that you pay on acquisition, you don't have for the other expenses. So I think the sweet spot is probably if there's not a huge infrastructure investment, you can pay more for the land. But I think that's what a private developer would say too. Like, it's right off the road, and if there's power, gas, water, it's worth more. If we have to drive build a 3/4 mile long road just to get there, pull all the utilities up, drill a well, it's worth less. If it's significant grade change in engineering, it's worth less. Not worthless, but worth less. So I don't know, but I actually think I probably could generate a number, but I hadn't thought of it that way. So maybe I can get back to you, but probably not right now. Because there is a cost per unit of just construction. And if the kind of cap per unit of total development cost, let's say, is $450,000, which I know sounds outrageous, per apartment unit, you could kind of back your way into what's left, but I don't have the answer.
Yeah,
right now.
I know from experience, most developers would love to be at 50 a unit. They usually end up being about 100 a unit. So in a 22 unit project, 2.2 million isn't out of the realm for the raw land. And to your point, and I hope everybody understands this, what Charlie and Colin are saying, if they have to pay 2.2 million for a property, that's 2.2 million they don't have to put in architecture or unit or build out. So subsidies for acquisition, infrastructure costs, or donations of land are important.
Right, and it's partly driven by there's a kind of a cap of what they call the TDC, the total development cost per unit. Technically, they remove the cap, but the scoring would say that you get negative points if you're over 450. And it depends on your building type. If it's an elevator building, it's one thing. If it's, scattered site or garden style, which is kind of like what you think of as like a suburban apartment building, that they all have kind of different price points. So that's kind of what drives that, is you're kind of capped out. So you spend a lot on land, you just have less, that's the problem.
Hello, Alice Buckley. Thank you all for putting this together. Great to see you guys. Thank you for coming down. Very informative. Thank you. I'm going to change the conversation a little bit. My question is more about the short-term vacation rentals. I know you answered about the town of South Kingstown. The state did put together a legislative plan, I believe, but I have not heard the outcome of that. So I guess my question is more directed to the planning department. in terms of the state of Rhode Island, what was the outcome of that? And then is there a consensus about short-term rental, vacation rentals, and is it affecting our housing stock, our affordability of housing, and is there feedback from the other towns, such as Westerly and Newport and Providence, that have put some regulations in place?
There's multiple layers to your question, so I'll do my best to try and just summarize an answer to the overriding theme that you're going for. Within South Kingstown, Town Council, through work of the Town Manager's Office and the Building Department, did pass a short-term rental registration. And some of that came out of the fact that the state's business department does require short-term rental registration. But when we hired a consulting team to look at how many rental registrations were in town versus how many were registered with the state, there's a substantial disparity. So the town, to Megan's point earlier, thought it was important to take it on themselves to get a better handle of exactly how many units exist in town. And then from that, you could potentially amass which ones are legitimately permitted, which ones aren't. But there isn't a step right now to make that registry regulatory. That could be something 5, 10, 15, I don't know how many years, if ever, in the future. One thing we can say is there's a marketplace for a rental of a single-family home. If a partner, if an individual, if a family was renting, there's a marketplace for that. And it probably runs between $2,000 and $3,000 a month. But if your shoreline community, and it's not just South Kingstown, it's Narragansett, it's Newport, it's Madison, Connecticut, it's Greenwich, Connecticut, it's the New Jersey Shore, it's Virginia Beach. It is the fact that you're a shoreline community which is advantageous for someone in a short-term rental, where things run the gamut from $200 a night to $10,000 a week. If you need to supplement your income to be able to afford your home, you may rent out for a period of time, which may make the unit affordable to you because you can rent it, or because you rent it and there's a whole new marketplace, it introduces the commercial sector or an investor who isn't buying the home for a single family. He can buy the home at a different price point because, Charlie talked about, there's a spreadsheet for everybody. And if you're an investor, there's a spreadsheet to buy and flip a house to a family, and there's an investor to buy, renovate, and put it in the marketplace at $200 a night. $200 a night is $6,000 a month, 70% vacancy, you're running about $4,500 a month. You can carry a pretty good note for $4,500 a month. So it's just a different price point. I don't think we have a full handle on how that exactly affects us. I know Mr. Manning has talked about the Narragansett experience, where it's 1/3 owner-occupied, 1/3 rental, and 1/3 kind of summer vacation home. That is understood in Narragansett. We're not to the point where we quite understand that exact percentage in South Kingstown. Hopefully we'll get there with, working groups and our rental registration, but it's not an easy thing to achieve. It's very complicated and it's very dynamic. And the marketplace drives the condition. If someone's willing to spend $10,000 a month and a homeowner has inquiries of $6,000, and someone tells him him or her they would have paid $15,000, that may change the marketplace next year, or even in July versus August. So no distinct answer. It's time is going to bear out.
I will note, Alice, that Narragansett put out a housing affordability study at the end of January this year, and If you read it, it won't be any sort of mind-blowing revelation, but it does provide numbers that basically support all of the things that you suspected were going on in terms of student rentals taking away from the available housing and driving up rental prices in other markets for full-time residents. So it's not earth-shattering, but it does provide the actual numbers for everything that we've suspected is going on all along. And one of the reasons Narragansett was able to do this is because they've been collecting a lot of this rental data for a long time, and hopefully we'll get there at some point in South Kingstown and be able to perform a similar analysis of our housing stock.
And on the rental side for the students in any community, it's not what a home rents for, it's what a bedroom rents for. And typical bedrooms, depending on communities, are $800 to $1,200 a month is probably that range. And more urban scenarios, again, it's supply and demand. If students can't find housing on the campus, then the private sector marketplace takes over. And if everybody has units for $1,000 a bedroom and none are available, and you're the only one holding the next units available, you may charge $1,200 a month. And then that continues to drive the marketplace. If you have a 4-bedroom home that rents for $1,200 a bedroom, that's $4,800 a month, or we'll round it off to $5,000 a month, that's $60,000 a year. That's when investors start to look at properties, because the price point is different and it sparks investment in a different type of housing. So.
I think one thing I want to add, just from a real estate perspective, what I've seen as of late in the town is a lot of the new building is actually being bought up by investors. So I know that there's one neighborhood in particular where an investor came in and bought and is renting the homes in there for $6,000 a week in the summertime. So any new building that we think is going on, I think sometimes when you have for-profit developers, because it's a good investment, to your point, it's a good investment. So you're seeing people coming in and buying up these homes and renting them out. So I think moving forward, when we talk about building, what I like about the nonprofits is that they're making sure that the building is actually going to people who fit the criteria of that building. And I know, Jamie, you said this once at a town council meeting, but when you do the inclusionary zoning and you do have those units that are available for sale, which typically are 120% AMI, what we see is they don't even come to market. So a lot of times I had someone just reach out to me actually this week about the new places in Matunic that are for sale right now, and they said, what about the affordable units? And those units don't actually even come on the market. So those are typically bought with cash by people who do qualify because they have fixed incomes, but the amount of money that you have in the bank is not factored into that. So my concern with building and when we do affordable units is making sure that the units are actually going to people who, and there are no rules on that. So you can come in and buy an affordable unit with cash. And that's typically what we see.
Megan makes a good point. It's not an asset evaluation. So you could have $10 million in cash in the bank in a trust or in your pillow, in gold that doesn't earn interest. It only appreciates with the market. But if you're income qualified, you can qualify for that unit as an affordable and then take money out of the bank and, to Megan's point, pay cash because it's income based. It's not asset based.
And just a quick story on that, there are some great for-profit developers out there. I'm not going to knock them all. But one in particular that was building down my way, they went door to door to a neighboring condo and found somebody who was willing to sell him their condo. He then rented it out for 1.5 years to them for free, or for very little, until that income from the sale fell off their yearly income taxes, and then bought the new condo off of him, the affordable unit, for cash. So he went arranged his own buyer, so he knew he could sell it for the maximum amount. That individual got an upgrade from the condos I think we're selling for the fair market for $900,000. So she got a nice increase in quality of life. But there's some savvy developers out there who, no matter how many rules and regulations we put around these, there are folks who are going to find a way around it. And I think, if the town really wants to prioritize, the town folks who are most in need, working with the nonprofit developers is oftentimes the best way to go.
Hi, Natalie Jacfoni. I'm very much interested in the short-term and student rental issues. And what I find really confusing is that we're here talking about how to build, some affordable housing. We're missing a whole segment that we're talking about. We're admitting that new houses go to investment, and we're saying this happens everywhere, which it does. It's happening around the world, which makes me wonder why we take so long looking into stuff and deciding what we're going to do, right? So we just talked about, let's get a registry going and take a look at it and look at the data. I mean, I don't know if you all know, but there are sites that actually aggregate data from Airbnb and short-term rentals that give you an idea of how many these are. We could ask the community, because I could tell you, because I live near these places, and I came to this town because it's a community, right? And this story is going on everywhere. So what I want to know is, what are we thinking of doing to disincentivize renting to students, disincentivize short-term rentals, right? Why are those of us who live and work here paying the same property tax rate as people running businesses when we know what it's doing is cannibalizing our community? So I'd like to know what has been talked about from either sort of board or body here to actually put some disincentives in place, or maybe increase a tax rate to actually fund things for the town, like the new school or like affordable housing. If there's this much interest in people coming here and paying those kinds of rates, why not take advantage of that and be one of the communities in the world that actually does something instead of just studying it? So I'd love to hear your response or what we've thought about doing.
So my name is Jim Manny. I'm the town manager.
Hi.
So hi. I understand your frustration. I live in this town. I've lived here for 25 years. What you see, I see, and I think everyone in this room sees, and probably 30 out of the 32,000 that live here see it as well, right? So the one thing I would disagree with you is we are moving fast. We are. And although government moves slow, I don't feel this administration, this town council is at all. We've accomplished a lot in the 2 years that I've been here. We have a municipal court and a housing court which is addressing blight properties in town that are driving prices down. And I talked to the judge today, and they're moving very well. 50% cure rate on those in a very quick manner. But the rental registration is the first step. And this town council allowed the staff to bring them a proposal, and they gave it. And now we have a rental registration. That's the first step. But we have to know what we don't know. We don't know what the percent is in this town that is owner-occupied versus rental. And right now, it's a guess. We're estimating it's about 75% owner-occupied, maybe 25% rental. I'm sure the rental will come in higher. The state does not have good data, so we need our own data. We need about 4 to 5 months, maybe 6 months to study what that data is, and then bring it back to the council, so that we can then come up with regulatory, if the council wants it as a policy, to regulate these properties, to come up with solutions that would disenfranchise people buying them and using them as businesses. Make no doubt about it, short-term rentals are the biggest threat to this town right now for affordable housing.
not just for affordable housing, for actually having a community and way of life.
I use the word community every day. I moved here because it's a community that I love, and I want to preserve it as best I can, and I think there's a lot of people that want to too. But we can't make a rash decision and just start implementing regulatory issues on we don't really know what the data is. I was the town manager in Narragansett for 3 years, in between stints.
Yes, I've heard.
When I was on my state police stints. That town has been doing this for a long time, studying their demographics. It is 1/3 owner-occupied, 1/3 pure rentals, businesses, and 1/3 of vacation homes that are probably rented most of the time as well. They've been doing this for a long time. We were behind the 8 ball, but past couple of years, we've been putting the stuff in place to really study this. So I ask you and other residents, just be patient. Let's get all the data. Let's find out what we need to know, and then bring it back to the council for policy decisions on regulations if they want to have that policy.
I appreciate that. I'm just wondering, when we say, we're sort of looking to Narragansett, I think there's a lot of other towns and cities to look at that have done things that are creative. And I understand wanting to know and have data to act on things. But whether the short-term rentals are 20% or 40%, right? That doesn't seem to me to make a difference as to why we should potentially wait to take action. You just sort of know, is the problem this big or this big, but it's a big problem.
Well, we are
so I
taking
guess I'm
action.
confused by why the town wouldn't be talking more aggressively about what the actions are to disincentivize, because in the meantime, the problem is growing. I mean, it's something that really just sort of exploded across the world over the last 5 to 10 years. So waiting a couple more years, I feel like just makes things more entrenched.
Yeah, we're not waiting a couple of years. I'm asking to be patient. We need, data is power. We need to know what we have and what the issues are. We shouldn't come up with a policy on something we really don't know what it is. Is it student rentals? Is it short-term rentals? Is it Airbnbs? Is it VRBOs? I don't think the student rental issue is the major problem. That's been around for a long time. It's the Airbnbs and the VRBOs, the real short-term 1, 2, 3 day rentals. Those are the properties that landowners, property owners are making 10, 12, 15, 20,000 a month on these properties. So those are the things we need to look at and see what number that is, and then bring it to the council to let them make the decision on how far they want to regulate, if at all.
Thank you. Natalie, I wanted to add to your point too, to tie it back to our the community development aspect. One of the things that I like about, if we were to have, say, a Pine View type thing, so that was 40 units, right? The property management company can stipulate that people who live and work in town are prioritized. Right. They're all year rentals. So I am completely in support of the idea that doing something about this problem we all know is huge is imperative. But if we're also trying to develop units for people who live and work here and can't currently afford one, and we make it an easier path for them exclusively, that also helps offset that in my mind. If we have more rentals available that are for people who live and work in town.
Right. Oh, no, I think it's both, but it just seems...
Absolutely.
When we talk about how we don't build, right? But what we have that's already built in communities like ours and all over the world are being taken by what's essentially the world's biggest hotel that just gobbles these things up. So figuring out a way to disincentivize that, you've already got the thing built, right? So, or if it's, everyone says you want to be here, people want to be by the beach, great, but why does that mean it needs to be massively affordable for everyone to do that when we live here? So I agree that it's both, but I think this is probably a much more untapped area and likely to be more fruitful than simply trying to build new units. But anyway, thank you for listening.
I just want to, I don't know if it's a correction, but make people aware that on the rental side and the sale side, Charlie went through a whole slide of financial and regulatory aspects. And with regards to the regulatory aspect, you have things such as Fair Housing Act and discriminatory practices. So you have to be very careful on how you use the nomenclature of prioritizing a resident versus a non-resident so that you do not get in trouble with the fair housing compliance, which if you do, to Charlie's point earlier, can affect your long-term financing. So there are things you can do and things that cross the line with regards to compliance.
It is possible, though, because I know even the Housing Authority with their vouchers have certain priority things, and one of them is people who live in town. So it is possible, is my point.
Yeah, that's what, yeah, in South Kingston, I know in Narragansett does it as well, but the housing authorities, they have lists with hundreds of people on the lists. I think we looked it up, it was, what was it, 200 people on the list, maybe 10 years ago, and now it's over 6,000. So the South Kingstown Housing Authority has 6,000 people on a list hoping to get a voucher or get into housing here. So obviously the demand is high, but what they do is it's a waiting list and they have priorities on the waiting list. So when they pull names, it's based on preference, if you work in the town, if you live in the town, if you're homeless, all sorts of things. But it is possible to make, if you do have housing like that, to make preferential lists when you're pulling people's names, because it's something that most housing authorities are doing right now.
Yeah, and I would say that's all. Again, I don't know as much about the rental, but I would say is we're in Rhode Island, people don't drive more than 20 minutes. And so I would say virtually all of the homes that we've sold since I've been here have been to individuals or families who live in Washington County, work in Washington County, or used to live here and had to move because they could no longer afford it. And I know Charlie did a lot of work looking at their breakdown of where people came from that lived in Pineview, and virtually all of them came from Washington County with, maybe 2 from just over the border in Connecticut and a handful of folks from further north, but it was pretty convincing that the folks who are moving into the units here tend to have a connection to the community, whether it's they might be in Charlestown and they're coming to South Kingstown or vice versa, but it's, we're in the same region.
Yeah, and I guess keep in mind that when there's no housing stock, people living in South Kingstown can only live there if there's housing. So when people are coming from North Kingstown or elsewhere, that may not be because that's the community they even identify with. That's just where the housing stock was. So we did find we had some people from Warwick and a couple of places, but they gladly moved back into the community that they had grown up in or that they wanted to raise a family in. So we did find overwhelmingly, and you had that pie chart, it's over 90% of the people were literally from Washington County. And then just to the other point, there are some nuances in preference. So there are some ways to have some units have preferential, and one would be project-based vouchers from a housing authority that can give preference. But for those units that don't have those, what we tend to do is that as the property is coming close to being online, we put up, we market to the area, we market to local papers, we go to community centers, everything, senior centers. We try to get a robust interest list, and then that interest list is immediately sent applications for housing when that's available. Those people return their applications quickly, and then in sort of the order that we receive them, we review them, and as people are vetted to be certifiable in those units. So we did find that we were able largely to serve at Exeter folks who were from the local community, but we do have to not run afoul of fair housing. So there are some nuances, but we're not all attorneys, so it's okay to not. But I don't want to promise something that we can't provide either. And to be fair, if I have to move to Warwick because there's no house in South Kingstown, but this is where I'm from, I would not want to be discriminated against either in finding a unit here.
I grew up in Warwick. It's not a bad place. Thank you all for this. I have hopefully an easier question than all the financial components of all this. Regarding the database, which I agree data is king, but data is only king. The database is only going to work if we actually have the right data. So can we speak a little bit about how the data is being inputted into this database?
So 2 primary sources were used initially, and that was what the State Department of Business Registration had with their short-term rental aspects. We also retained the services of a consulting firm who looked at the marketplace. So There's the registry, and then you go to Airbnb, and you go to BRB and the other online entities, and there are firms out there who will amass all that data and say, well, business registry has 400, and I'm using this as an example. State Business Registry has 4 units, but yet when I scroll down on what's available in South Kingstown, I found 800 units available this Saturday. So there's a disparity there. So our third source, which is coming online, is the actual registry within the community, which will be able to track who's registering, and with the data we have of who is out there, potentially cross-reference and see where the gaps are. In a perfect world, everyone who is renting, online, will properly register. To Jim's point, if there's still that disparity, then the council will evaluate recommendations from staff, which could become regulatory. And if they become regulatory and, one, you register, you have regulations that require you to be registered. If you're not, you're operating inappropriately, and there's fines and penalties. That data will help amass who's here legally and who potentially isn't here legally. To Jim's point, you now have municipal court, which allows the town to move much more quickly and on enforcement, where historically zoning and or planning violations, building violations took years, where now we can handle them in months. So there's layers to a process. Jim mentioned government moves slow, but we're trying to move faster than traditional government. We have a council who's very concerned. We have a planning board who's concerned. EDC's been involved. You have a housing collaborative group who is concerned about the competition in the marketplace between student rentals and short-term rentals and how that equates to the marketplace. So everybody's looking at this, but to your point, when people attack why you're doing something, the municipality needs to defend it with data. And the data will determine and support why decisions are being made, yay or nay, from a regulatory or registry standpoint. So we support the data collection.
I'd like to just take a moment to acknowledge the receptivity that I think we feel as the Affordable Housing Collaborative from the town staff, for sure, and from the town council. And, we really appreciate the registry going into sort of as soon after the idea was even raised. And I also want to acknowledge, I'm sorry that I forget your name, but the speaker who talked about having some disincentives. I don't think that's something that we have discussed a whole lot. We've really sort of gone forward with the very positive and how can we build more. And I just want to say how much I appreciate that sort of idea of whether it's taxes or whatever, that, and everything's so complicated, right? Everything is so complicated, but I think it's a great thing to explore. So, thank you.
And I just want to follow up. There is a balance in a community and an economy. So there's an economy associated with short-term rentals that helps the restaurants, helps the shops, helps the stores. The college rentals outside of the university help the economy. So I don't have an exact number. Narragansett's surviving on a third. I don't know if that's the magic number or that's too high. But there are intricacies associated with the model we have now. And as time moves on and more data is gained, we'll get a better handle on what that complexity is and how that affects the totality of a community and also the economic strength of a community too.
One last thing to answer your question more directly is there are things that other communities are doing. Newport by far has the most stringent one so far. Providence is getting, they just did away with their homestead exemption and now has a two-tier tax rate, $10 for owner-occupied, $18 for those that own pure rentals. Narragansett has a very restrictive policy that they just implemented that they're getting a lot of pushback on. We can't, not one size fits all. What could work for Newport might not work for us, and so forth and so on. But once again, once we get the data and we see what truly is affecting this community that we live in, and how do we want to preserve it, that's when a plan will be presented to the council. And my hope is early 2025, we start really getting really serious, because December's the deadline when rental registration really kicks in. Just be patient.
My suggestion is if you have fees and penalties, and if there's any revenue coming out of that rental database, that you do have an affordable housing trust fund that would love to have another source of revenue. I know there's an expense to the database, but I'm still trying to convince Narragansett, but since they've been putting that revenue either way for a while, but I think since we know short-term rentals are one of the largest factors in driving up rental costs, it's a great place to take any revenue that's driven out of that program.
Megan, do you have any closing comments? I don't see any other questions.
Are we questions? So I just want to say thank you for coming out. I know that it has been 2 hours, and we appreciate all of the insight. We also have an opening on the committee, so if anybody is interested in getting into affordable housing, please reach out. And we are always available if you want to reach out to us directly. Brian?
Yeah, just for anybody who's interested in affordable housing, my name's Brian Wagner. I'm a senior planner in the planning department. I'm the liaison to these people, so there's no way to reach them directly, but if you reach out to me, I will make sure that your questions or information or whatever you have gets to the committee.
And with that, I think we are all set. Thank you so much for coming. Motion to adjourn? Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay.